The sprawling estate of Thornfield Hall stood as a testament to power and control, ruled with unwavering authority by Duchess Georgiana Ashworth. 3 years had passed since her husband's mysterious death, and in that time she had transformed from grieving widow to formidable matriarch. No tenant dared challenge her, no servant questioned her commands, and no gentleman caller could penetrate the fortress she had built around herself. But on a rain-soaked autumn evening in 1815, a mud-splattered stranger rode through her gates, bearing documents that would shatter everything she believed about her carefully constructed world. The debt, he claimed, was not in gold, but in blood. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The morning mist clung to the valleys of Derbyshire as Duchess Georgiana Ashworth stood before the tall windows of Thornfield Hall's library, surveying her domain with the sharp gaze of a general inspecting troops. At 28, she had become a legend throughout the county, the beautiful widow who had taken her late husband's crumbling estate and transformed it into a prosperous empire through sheer force of will. Her dark auburn hair was pulled severely back from a face that might have been called angelic, had it not been for the steely determination in her emerald eyes. She wore black still, though propriety no longer demanded it, finding that the color served her purposes well. It commanded respect, discouraged familiarity, and reminded everyone that she had buried weakness along with the Duke. "Your Grace, the quarterly accounts," her steward, Mr. Pemberton, announced from the doorway, his voice carrying the nervous edge that most people adopted in her presence. Georgiana turned, her black bombazine gown rustling with the movement. "And the harvest exceeded projections by 12%. The new drainage system you implemented has proven remarkably effective." Pemberton stepped forward, extending the leather-bound ledger with hands that trembled slightly. She took the book, her fingers tracing the neat columns of figures with satisfaction. Every number represented a decision she had made, a challenge she had overcome, a battle she had won against those who had whispered that a woman could not manage such vast holdings. Lord Blackwood, her nearest neighbour, had offered to assist her within days of the Duke's funeral. She had shown him the estate boundaries and suggested he concern himself with his own lands. He had not visited since. "The tenants?" she inquired, though she already knew the answer. She made it her business to know everything that transpired on her lands. "They grumble less than they did under the Duke, Your Grace, if I may be frank." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Her late husband had been a drunkard and a gambler, qualities that had threatened to destroy the estate that had been in the Ashworth family for 3 centuries. When she had married him at 19, fresh from her father's country parsonage, she had believed in duty, devotion, and the transformative power of a good wife's influence. She had learned, painfully, that some men were beyond redemption. His death in a riding accident, falling from his horse while returning from his London club, drunk as always, had been both tragedy and liberation. The Ton had expected her to retreat to the dower house, to fade into respectable obscurity, while some distant male cousin assumed the title and the estates. Instead, she had invoked an obscure clause in the marriage settlement, one that her own father, a country vicar with surprising legal acumen, had insisted upon. Until a direct male heir could be proven, she held the estates in trust. No heir had emerged. No heir existed as far as she knew, which meant Thornfield Hall and its 15,000 acres belonged to her in all but name. "See that the widow Hartley's roof is repaired before the winter storms," Georgiana instructed, returning to the accounts. "And increase the allocation for the village school. Education improves productivity." "Yes, Your Grace." Pemberton bowed, clearly relieved to escape her presence. Alone again, Georgiana allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. The girl who had arrived here 9 years ago, trembling with wedding night nerves and romantic notions, would not recognize the woman she had become. That girl had believed that love and gentleness could save a broken man. This woman knew that survival required strength, that sentiment was a luxury she could not afford, and that the only person she could truly rely upon was herself. She had learned to read accounts with the precision of a banker, to negotiate contracts with the shrewdness of a merchant, and to command respect through the sheer force of her will. The servants might whisper about her coldness, the neighboring gentry might speculate about her loneliness, but none could deny her success. The library door opened again, this time without a preliminary knock, a liberty taken only by one person in the entire household. "Still wearing widow's weeds, Georgiana? One might think you actually mourned the wastrel." Lady Imogen Hartwell swept into the room with the casual elegance of a woman who had been born to privilege and never questioned it. At 53, the Countess remained a striking figure, her silver hair and sharp features lending her an aristocratic beauty that age had only enhanced. Georgiana's expression softened marginally. Lady Imogen was her late mother's second cousin, and the closest thing to family she had left. More importantly, she was one of the few people who had supported Georgiana's decision to take control of the estate, rather than submit to the judgment of distant male relations. "The color suits my disposition," Georgiana replied dryly, "and it prevents tiresome marriage proposals from fortune-hunting younger sons." "Does anything prevent those?" Lady Imogen settled into a leather chair with a rustle of lavender silk. "I encountered Lord Hartwick's nephew in the village yesterday. He inquired most particularly after your health. Lord Hartwick's nephew is 22 and drowning in gambling debts. I am neither a cure for youth nor a bank." Lady Imogen laughed, the sound rich with genuine amusement. "You have grown hard, my dear. I have grown practical." Georgiana closed the ledger and moved to the chair opposite her cousin. "What brings you to Thornfield this morning? You rarely venture out before noon." "Curiosity, primarily." Lady Imogen leaned forward slightly, her dark eyes glinting with interest. "There is a stranger in the village. Arrived last evening, apparently, and took rooms at the King's Arms. Quite a stir he has caused among the local maidens." Georgiana felt a flicker of irritation. "Derbyshire is not so remote that travellers are noteworthy. This one is. Tall, they say, with dark hair and eyes that see too much. He speaks like a gentleman but dresses like a man who has known harder roads, and he was asking questions." "What manner of questions?" "About Thornfield Hall, about the late Duke, and about you, Georgiana." The irritation crystallized into something sharper, more vigilant. In 3 years, she had grown accustomed to being the subject of gossip, but questions from strangers suggested something more purposeful than idle curiosity. "Did he give a name?" "Edmund Blackthorne, so I am told. The innkeeper said he carried letters of introduction, but showed them to no one." Georgiana rose, moving back to the window as if the view could provide answers. The name meant nothing to her. The Duke had known countless people, mostly fellow gamblers, drinking companions, and the sort of hangers-on who gravitated toward weakness. She had spent the last 3 years systematically paying off his debts, untangling his obligations, and ensuring that no shadow from his dissolute past could threaten her hard-won security. "Perhaps he is simply another fortune hunter with better tactics," she said, though she did not believe it. Fortune hunters announced themselves boldly, armed with family connections and polished manners. They did not lurk in village inns, asking questions. "Perhaps?" Lady Imogen did not sound convinced either. "Though I thought you should be warned. You have made enemies, my dear, in your determination to succeed where men said you would fail. And enemies sometimes hire strangers to ask questions." Georgiana turned, meeting her cousin's concerned gaze with calm resolve. "Let them ask. I have nothing to hide, and Thornfield's accounts are impeccable. If this Edmund Blackthorne wishes to see me, he knows where I reside." But even as she spoke with confidence, something cold stirred in her chest, a premonition of change, of challenge, of the careful order she had built being somehow threatened. She dismissed the feeling as foolish. She had faced down creditors, displaced male heirs, and the censure of society. Whatever this stranger wanted, she would meet it with the same iron will that had carried her through every other trial. She had not survived the Duke to be undone by a stranger with questions. Yet that evening, as she sat alone in the library, reviewing estate correspondence by candlelight, she found herself glancing toward the darkened windows, half expecting to see a face staring back at her from the night. The stranger's arrival felt like the first crack in ice, small, barely noticeable, but carrying the promise of something breaking apart. The storm arrived with the sunset, turning the autumn evening into a tempest of wind and rain that rattled the windows of Thornfield Hall and sent servants scurrying to secure shutters. Georgiana worked on in the library, finding the violence of the weather oddly soothing. Nature, at least, was honest in its fury. She was reviewing a contract for new breeding stock when the commotion erupted in the entrance hall. Raised voices, the sound of struggle, and then her butler's outraged protest cutting through the storm's howl. "Sir, you cannot simply force your way. Your Grace, I attempted to prevent—" Georgiana rose swiftly, instinct making her hand reach for the letter opener on her desk. A moment later, her library door swung open to reveal a figure that matched Lady Imogen's description perfectly, though words alone could not have captured the sheer physical presence of the man who stood dripping rainwater onto her Turkish carpet. Edmund Blackthorne was tall, as reported, with the lean, dangerous build of a man accustomed to relying on his own strength. His dark hair fell in wet tangles around a face that might have been handsome had it not been set in such harsh lines. His eyes, grey as the storm outside, fixed on her with an intensity that felt almost physical. Duchess Ashworth. His voice carried the educated accent of a gentleman, overlaid with something rougher, as if refined speech had been learned later in life. "Forgive the dramatic entrance. Your servant seemed reluctant to announce me. That is what servants do when strangers arrive uninvited during a storm." Georgiana kept her voice cool, though her heart had begun to beat faster. She gestured sharply to her butler. "It is all right, Ashford. Mr. Blackthorne is apparently lost. We shall direct him back to his inn once the storm passes." "I am not lost, Your Grace. I am exactly where I intend to be." Edmund stepped further into the room, water dripping from his greatcoat onto her floors. He carried a leather satchel which he held carefully, as if it contained something precious. "And I am afraid the inn will not suit my purposes. I have come to take up residence at Thornfield Hall." The sheer audacity of the statement left her momentarily speechless. Behind Edmund, she could see Ashford's face turning an alarming shade of purple. "You presume much, Mr. Blackthorne," Georgiana said finally, her voice dropping to the tone that made servants quake and creditors retreat. "I do not know what fantasy has brought you to my door, but I assure you, it is no fantasy." He reached into the satchel and withdrew a sheaf of documents, their paper yellowed with age, but carefully preserved. "I have here documents proving that your late husband, Duke Henry Ashworth, pledged a portion of this estate as collateral against a debt incurred 7 years ago, a debt that was never repaid, a debt that upon his death became due immediately." The words hit her like physical blows. Georgiana felt the blood drain from her face, even as she fought to maintain her composure. "That is absurd. I have reviewed every one of my late husband's debts. I have paid every legitimate claim. There is no outstanding—" "This debt was not recorded in his general accounts." Edmund's voice softened slightly, though his gaze remained unwavering. "For obvious reasons. The agreement was private, witnessed by only 2 individuals, one of whom is now dead. Then convenient for you to claim it." Georgiana forced herself to step forward, to close the distance between them, rather than retreat. A dead witness, and convenient documents appearing 3 years after the Duke's death. "You must think me remarkably gullible, Mr. Blackthorne." "I think you remarkably intelligent, Your Grace, which is why I came prepared." He laid the documents on her desk with careful precision. "You will find here the original contract, signed by the Duke himself. I assume you can verify his signature." You will also find the deeds to the specific properties pledged, the Western Timberlands, 3 tenant farms, and the hunting lodge at Blackmore. And finally, you will find a letter from my father, Thomas Blackthorne, detailing the circumstances of the loan. Georgiana stared at the papers as if they were vipers. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse to look, to throw this man out into the storm, to deny that any of this could be true. But she had not rebuilt this estate by hiding from unpleasant realities. With hands that trembled only slightly, she picked up the first document. The signature at the bottom was unmistakably her late husband's. She had seen it often enough on gambling vows and debt notices. The date was indeed 7 years ago, during one of Henry's worst periods, when he had disappeared to London for 3 months and returned hollow-eyed and deeper in debt than ever. What was the debt for? Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. My father loaned the Duke £15,000 to cover gambling losses. Without it, the Duke faced exposure and ruin. My father, who had his own reasons for wanting an alliance with the Ashworth name, agreed to keep the loan private. The terms were simple: repayment within 5 years, or the pledged properties would transfer to my father's estate. The Duke died before the 5 years elapsed, triggering an immediate transfer clause. £15,000. The sum was staggering. Georgiana's mind raced through calculations. The Western Timberlands alone generated substantial income. The farms were among the most productive on the estate. And Blackmore, though ostensibly just a hunting lodge, sat on nearly 1,000 acres of prime land. Why wait 3 years to claim this debt? She looked up, searching his face for signs of deception. If these documents are genuine, you could have presented them immediately after the Duke's death. Something flickered in Edmund's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or memory. My father died 2 years ago. He spent his final months setting his affairs in order, which included ensuring I knew about this agreement. It took time to locate all the documents, to prepare the legal groundwork. And frankly, Your Grace, I had my own life to settle before I could take on the responsibility of English landholdings. Your own life where? India primarily. The West Indies before that. I have spent the last decade building my own fortune, far from England's shores. A bitter smile touched his lips. I had no intention of ever returning, but my father's death and these documents changed my plans. Georgiana set the papers down, her mind working furiously. If these documents were genuine, and she would need her own solicitor to verify that, she faced a disaster that could undo 3 years of careful work. The loss of those properties would not bankrupt the estate, but it would severely diminish it, would weaken her position, would provide ammunition to all those who had said a woman could not truly manage such holdings. I will need time to have these documents authenticated, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. You cannot simply arrive and expect. I expect nothing but what is legally owed. Edmund's voice hardened. I have secured a legal opinion from 2 London barristers. The documents are authentic, the debt is valid, and the transfer of property is enforceable. However, I am not entirely without mercy, Your Grace. How generous of you. He ignored the sarcasm. The contract includes a provision that if the Ashworth estate cannot pay the debt in full, alternative arrangements can be negotiated. I am prepared to negotiate. What manner of arrangements? Suspicion sharpened her tone. Allow me to take up residence here at Thornfield Hall while we discuss terms. Give me access to the estate records, particularly those relating to the pledged properties. And most importantly, Your Grace, give me honest answers about what truly happened to my father's investment and why the Duke never made a single payment toward his debt. The request was outrageous, impossible. To allow this stranger, this potential charlatan, free access to her home and her records went against every protective instinct she had developed. Yet if his claim was legitimate, she could not afford to simply refuse him. A legal battle would be expensive, public, and uncertain. You ask me to welcome a stranger who arrives with documents that threaten everything I have built, Georgiana said quietly. To trust a man I know nothing about, whose claims may be nothing more than an elaborate fraud. Then learn about me, Your Grace. Investigate my background. Verify every word I have spoken. But do it while I am here, where you can watch me, where I can watch you, and where we can determine the truth together." He paused, and for the first time, something like sympathy entered his expression. "I know what it is to have everything one has worked for threatened. I did not come here to destroy you, Duchess Ashworth. I came to claim what was promised to my father, yes, but also to understand why a debt of honor was so completely ignored." Georgiana turned away, staring into the fire as if the flames could offer guidance. Every rational thought told her to refuse, to summon her solicitor immediately, to prepare for legal warfare. But something else, intuition perhaps, or simply recognition of the inevitable, told her that this man would not be so easily dismissed. And beneath the shock and anger, a small, traitorous part of her mind noted that Edmund Blackthorne had called it a debt of honor, and that his eyes, hard as they were, did not hold the calculating emptiness she had seen in so many fortune hunters. "3 days," she said finally, turning back to face him. "You may remain at Thornfield Hall for 3 days while I have these documents verified. You will be given a guest chamber in the East Wing, and you will conduct yourself as a guest, not as a claimant. If my solicitor confirms the document's validity, we will discuss terms. If they prove fraudulent, I will have you arrested for attempted fraud and trespass." Edmund inclined his head, the gesture somehow conveying both respect and determination. "Fair terms, Your Grace. Though I should warn you, the documents are genuine. In 3 days, you will know that everything I have told you is true, and then we must decide what happens next." As she watched Ashford escort the stranger away to prepare a guest chamber, Georgiana felt the walls of her carefully constructed world trembling. For 3 years, she had ruled Thornfield Hall without challenge, without compromise. Now a ghost from her dead husband's past had arrived, carrying papers that could destroy her independence and reduce her once again to the powerless position she had fought so hard to escape. The storm raged on outside, and within the library, Georgiana stood alone with documents that might prove to be her undoing, wondering how her husband could have betrayed her from beyond the grave. The following morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having washed the world clean. Georgiana had slept poorly, her mind churning through possibilities and strategies until the pre-dawn light finally allowed her to abandon the pretense of rest. By the time the household stirred, she had already dispatched an urgent letter to her solicitor in London and begun a systematic review of her late husband's private papers, searching for any reference to Thomas Blackthorne or a £15,000 debt. She found nothing. Either the Duke had been extraordinarily careful in concealing this particular obligation, or Edmund Blackthorne was an exceptionally skilled forger. A knock at the library door interrupted her 5th reading of the supposed contract. "Enter," she called, expecting her maid with the breakfast tray she had requested. Instead, Edmund Blackthorne stepped through the door, and she felt her jaw tighten with irritation. He had clearly availed himself of the hot water and fresh clothing she had grudgingly ordered prepared, transforming from storm-drenched intruder to polished gentleman. His dark hair was neatly tied back, and he wore a simple but well-tailored coat of deep blue superfine over buff breeches. He looked, she thought with annoyance, far more respectable than he had any right to. "Mr. Blackthorne, I do not recall inviting you to the library." "You did not, Your Grace, which is why I'm asking permission now rather than presuming it." He remained by the door, his posture respectful but not subservient. "I hoped we might discuss the specific properties mentioned in the contract. If I am to eventually take possession, I should understand what I will be managing." "You presume the documents will be validated. I presume the truth will become clear. Surely there is no harm in a conversation." Georgiana studied him for a long moment. In the clear morning light, she could better assess the man who had so disrupted her peace. His face was lean and angular, marked by a thin scar along his left jawline that spoke of violence in his past. His hands, she noticed, bore the calluses of physical labor beneath the gentleman's gloves, hands that had done more than shuffle papers and sign documents. "Very well," she said finally, gesturing to the chair opposite her desk. "Though I warn you, Mr. Blackthorne, I'm intimately familiar with every acre of this estate. If you prove ignorant of basic agricultural matters, it will only strengthen my suspicion that you are a fraud." A slight smile touched his lips. "A fair test, Your Grace." For the next hour, they discussed the western timberlands, their yield, management practices, and the complex system of cutting rotations that balanced immediate profit with long-term sustainability. To Georgiana's surprise and reluctant respect, Edmund proved knowledgeable not merely about English forestry, but about comparative practices he had observed in India and the West Indies. "Teak forests require entirely different management," he explained, leaning forward with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely interested in the subject. "The growing cycle is longer, the wood denser. But the principles of sustainable yield remain constant. Take too much too quickly, and future generations pay the price." "You speak as someone who has managed land yourself," Georgiana observed, unable to keep a note of curiosity from her voice. "I have. My father's fortunes were not always steady, Your Grace. There were years when I worked alongside laborers in West Indian sugar fields, and later when I managed timber contracts in India. I learned early that wealth means nothing if you do not understand the labor that creates it." He paused, his expression growing somber. "It is also why my father's loan to your husband mattered so much. £15,000 represented nearly everything he had accumulated. He believed in the alliance it would create, in the respectability the Ashworth connection would bring. He died, still believing the Duke was a man of honor." The words stung more than Georgiana wanted to admit. The Duke was many things. Honorable was not among them, though I learned that truth too late. Edmund's gaze sharpened. "You did not know about his gambling debts when you married him. I knew he was charming and titled, that my father's small parish living had not prepared me for the complexities of aristocratic marriage, and that duty demanded I make the match my parents had arranged." The words emerged more bitter than she intended. "I learned about the debts, the drinking, the mistresses, and the fundamental weakness of his character only after the wedding. By then, of course, it was too late. Yet you took control after his death. You could have retreated to a dower house, lived quietly on a modest settlement, and let some distant cousins squander what remained, let the tenants suffer under yet another careless master." Georgiana shook her head firmly. "I had spent 8 years watching the Duke destroy everything his family had built. When he died, I saw an opportunity to restore it, to prove that competent management mattered more than gender. You have certainly proved that." Edmund's tone carried genuine admiration. "The estate's reputation has spread even to London. They speak of the Iron Duchess, who turned failure into prosperity. They speak of me as an unnatural woman who oversteps her place. Only those whose own inadequacies are highlighted by your success." The comment surprised her into a genuine smile. Brief, but real. "You are more perceptive than most men of my acquaintance, Mr. Blackthorne. I have had excellent teachers in the value of perception, Your Grace. When one is a second son, with no inheritance, trading in distant ports where trust is a commodity more valuable than gold, one learns to read people accurately, or one does not survive." Their conversation drifted then to the tenant farms, to crop rotations and drainage systems, to the delicate balance between extracting profit and maintaining the land's productivity. Georgiana found herself explaining innovations she had introduced, techniques she had read about in agricultural journals, experiments with new varieties of wheat, a cooperative system among tenants that shared resources and reduced individual risk. Edmund listened with careful attention, asking questions that demonstrated genuine understanding rather than polite interest. When she described her struggle to convince traditional farmers to try new methods, He laughed, a warm, unexpected sound that seemed to startle him as much as it did her. "You face the same resistance I encountered trying to introduce efficiency reforms in a Calcutta trading house," he said. "Men who would rather fail using familiar methods than succeed with unfamiliar ones. How did you overcome it?" "Patience and proof. I implemented changes on a small scale, demonstrated results, and let success speak louder than my words." He met her eyes directly. "Much as you have done here, I suspect." The recognition of kinship in their approaches softened something in Georgiana's defensive posture. This man, whatever his ultimate purpose, understood the challenges she had faced in ways that her own class never had. The neighboring gentry saw only impropriety in her management of the estate. Edmund Blackthorne saw strategy and success. Their discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Lady Imogen, who swept into the library with her usual dramatic flair and stopped short at the sight of the stranger in deep conversation with her cousin. "Well," she said, her sharp eyes moving between them with undisguised interest. "The mysterious Mr. Blackthorne, I presume?" Edmund rose smoothly, his bow perfectly calibrated, to acknowledge Lady Imogen's rank without excessive flattery. "Lady Imogen Hartwell, I believe. Your reputation for perspicacity precedes you, as does yours for disruption." Lady Imogen settled into a chair uninvited, her expression one of barely concealed amusement. "Georgiana, dear, the entire village is buzzing with speculation about your overnight guest. Mrs. Henderson has already started 3 different rumors, each more scandalous than the last." "Mrs. Henderson might consider occupying her time with something more productive than gossip," Georgiana said sharply, though she felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had not considered how Edmund's presence at Thornfield Hall would appear to the neighborhood. "Productivity is not Mrs. Henderson's forte, but perception, my dear, matters. You have spent 3 years building an unassailable reputation. A strange man residing under your roof without chaperonage threatens that. I am not a green girl requiring chaperonage, Imogen. No, but you are a woman alone managing substantial property. Society forgives men their irregularities, but judges women by impossible standards. You know this." Lady Imogen turned to Edmund with a considering look. "What are your intentions toward my cousin, Mr. Blackthorne? And choose your words carefully. I am old enough to value honesty over courtesy." Edmund did not flinch from her scrutiny. "My intentions are to claim what is legally owed to my father's estate. Beyond that, I intend no harm to the Duchess's reputation or person." "Legally owed?" Lady Imogen's tone sharpened. Georgiana mentioned documents. "May I see them?" For the next hour, Lady Imogen subjected the papers to examination that would have impressed a solicitor, asking pointed questions about provenance, witnesses, and legal precedent. Edmund answered each query with patience and thoroughness, providing details that strengthened rather than weakened his claim. Finally, Lady Imogen set the documents aside and fixed Georgiana with a serious look. "They appear genuine, my dear. I knew your husband, remember? This sort of secret debt, pledging properties to cover gambling losses while hiding the truth from his wife, that is exactly the sort of thing Henry would do." The words confirmed Georgiana's own growing certainty, and with that confirmation came a wave of anger so intense it took all her control to contain it. Even from the grave, Henry was sabotaging her. Even dead, he was still the weak, selfish man who valued his own comfort over every other consideration. "Then we must negotiate terms," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "Mr. Blackthorne has suggested alternative arrangements." "I have suggested that we find a solution that serves both our interests," Edmund corrected gently. "The properties pledged generate income for the estate. Their loss would diminish, but not destroy Thornfield's prosperity. However, I am not interested in diminishing your Grace's achievement. I am interested in understanding what happened to my father's money and securing a future for the lands he died, believing would someday support his family." "A pretty speech," Lady Imogen observed. "But what does it mean practically?" It means I propose a partnership of sorts. The properties transfer to my name as the documents specify, but their management remains under the Duchess's authority. I live here at Thornfield Hall, learn the estate, contribute my own knowledge and resources to its continued success. In return, the revenues from the disputed properties are split, half to compensate my father's estate, half to remain with Thornfield's general funds. Georgiana stared at him, trying to find the trap in the proposal. You would give me continued authority over lands you own? I would recognize that you have the knowledge and skill to manage them better than I could, at least initially, and I would gain the opportunity to learn from your expertise while ensuring my father's investment is not entirely lost. Edmund held her gaze steadily. I told you, Your Grace, I did not come here to destroy what you have built. I came seeking justice for my father, yes, but also because I find myself weary of wandering. I want to build something permanent, and Thornfield Hall offers that opportunity if we can find a way to work together rather than in opposition. Lady Imogen looked between them with an expression Georgiana could not quite read. An unusual proposal, and one that would require Mr. Blackthorne to remain in residence for an extended period. It would, Edmund acknowledged, which brings us back to your earlier concern about propriety. I'm prepared to address that concern through the most traditional means available, should the Duchess be willing. Georgiana felt her heart skip. What means? Marriage, Your Grace. A practical arrangement that would solve multiple problems. It would protect your reputation, legitimize my presence at Thornfield Hall, and create a legal framework for our partnership. I ask nothing of a personal nature, merely a formal alliance that serves our mutual interests. The word marriage hung in the air like a challenge. Georgiana opened her mouth to deliver a scathing refusal, to explain that she had no intention of ever again surrendering her independence to a husband's authority. But Lady Imogen spoke first, her voice thoughtful. You are serious, Mr. Blackthorne? You would offer marriage simply to facilitate a business arrangement? I would offer marriage to build a future, Lady Imogen. I have spent a decade trading in ports, where marriage is often a strategic alliance as much as a romantic union. I do not expect love, nor do I offer it, but I believe the Duchess and I could build something valuable together. A well-managed estate, mutual respect, and perhaps even friendship over time. Those seem like firmer foundations than fleeting passion. Georgiana found her voice at last. You are mad. You arrive uninvited, claim properties that threaten my security, and then propose marriage, as if it were a minor contract negotiation. I spent 8 years trapped in a marriage to a man who saw me as a possession. I will not make that mistake again. I do not see you as a possession, Your Grace. I see you as a formidable woman who has achieved something remarkable, despite every obstacle society placed in your path. Edmund's voice softened slightly. I am not offering ownership. I am offering partnership. True partnership, where your authority over the estate remains absolute, where your judgment is respected, where your voice carries equal weight to my own. Show me another man who would make such an offer. Show me a reason I should trust such an offer from a stranger. I cannot. Trust must be earned. But I can offer you time to test my sincerity, to observe whether my actions match my words. Let me remain at Thornfield Hall as your guest while your solicitor verifies the documents. Watch how I interact with your staff, your tenants, your lands. And if, at the end of that time, you believe I am a man of honor, consider my proposal. If not, we will find another solution. Georgiana looked at Lady Imogen, seeking guidance, but her cousin's expression revealed only thoughtful consideration. You are asking me to gamble everything I have built on your good intentions, Georgiana said finally. No, Your Grace. I am asking you to gamble on the possibility that two people who have both learned to survive alone might achieve more together. But it is your choice. It has always been your choice. That at least I can promise you. Whatever happens, you will retain the power to choose your own path. The conversation ended without resolution, but as Edmund took his leave, Georgiana found her certainty shaken. She had expected a villain or a fool. Edmund Blackthorne appeared to be neither, and that complicated everything in ways she was not prepared to face. 3 days became a week, and 1 week stretched into 3 as autumn deepened into early winter. Georgiana's solicitor confirmed what she had reluctantly accepted. The documents were genuine, the debt was valid, and Edmund Blackthorne had every legal right to claim the pledged properties. What surprised her was how little that changed the daily rhythms of life at Thornfield Hall. Edmund did not assert ownership or demand control. Instead, he rose early each morning and rode out with her estate manager, learning the boundaries and needs of the disputed lands. He spent hours in the library, studying the agricultural journals Georgiana had collected, asking questions that demonstrated both humility and sharp intelligence. He dined with her each evening, their conversations ranging from estate management to his experiences abroad, from her innovations in farming techniques to his observations on international trade. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, something shifted between them. The initial wariness softened into cautious respect, then into something that felt almost like friendship. Georgiana found herself looking forward to their evening discussions, to the challenge of debating someone who matched her intellect and experience. Lady Imogen observed these changes with knowing looks that Georgiana steadfastly ignored. It was in the 4th week of Edmund's residence that the letter arrived from London, not from her solicitor, but from Lord Sterling Blackwood, her neighbour who had once offered to assist her management of the estate. The letter was formal, but its contents were clear. Rumours had reached London about the widow Duchess living in improper intimacy with a mysterious stranger. Questions were being raised about the estate's management. Perhaps, Lord Blackwood suggested with barely concealed satisfaction, the time had come to reconsider male oversight of Thornfield Hall's affairs. Georgiana read the letter twice, feeling rage build with each word. 3 years of impeccable conduct, of success that could not be disputed, and still they waited for any excuse to undermine her authority. "Bad news, Your Grace." Edmund entered the breakfast room, his greeting dying at the sight of her expression. She handed him the letter without a word, watching as his own expression darkened while he read. "Lord Blackwood has a particular interest in seeing you fail," he asked quietly. "Lord Blackwood has a particular interest in acquiring Thornfield's eastern meadows at a fraction of their value. He made an offer shortly after the Duke's death, when he assumed a grieving widow would be easily manipulated. I refused. He has been waiting for an opportunity to retaliate ever since." Edmund set the letter down with controlled precision. "Then we must remove his ammunition." "How? You are here. The situation is irregular, and my reputation is already damaged, short of your immediate departure." "We marry," Edmund spoke calmly, as if discussing crop rotations rather than a life-changing decision. "Today, if possible. A special license can be obtained. Lady Imogen can serve as witness. By tomorrow, there will be no impropriety to gossip about, merely a widow who made a sensible match." "Sensible?" Georgiana rose, pacing to the window. "There is nothing sensible about marrying a man I have known less than a month." "Is there not? Consider the alternative, Your Grace. Lord Blackwood will not be satisfied with rumours. He will push for an investigation into the estate's management, will suggest that a woman living with a man, not her husband, lacks the moral character to control such vast holdings. Even if you retain legal ownership, the scandal will make your position untenable. You will be forced to either retreat to obscurity or fight a battle that damages everything you have built." Every word was true, and Georgiana hated the truth of it. Society's rules were designed to constrain women, to create impossible standards that ensured their dependence on male authority. She had navigated those rules through perfect propriety for 3 years, and now they threatened to destroy her over circumstances beyond her control. "Marriage would surrender my legal independence," she said quietly, voicing her deepest fear. English law grants husbands authority over their wives' property. I would lose control of Thornfield Hall. Not if the marriage contract specifies otherwise. Edmund moved to stand beside her, his reflection joining hers in the window. I consulted with your solicitor yesterday. With your permission, I hope to have these terms prepared before raising the subject again. We can draw up a settlement that protects your authority absolutely. Thornfield Hall remains under your control. The disputed properties are managed jointly, but final decisions rest with you. Your income is your own. I gain residence and the right to participate in estate management, but never to override your judgment. The law can be shaped by contract, Your Grace. It requires careful drafting and ironclad language, but it can be done. I have no interest in dispossessing you. I have every interest in partnership with a woman whose abilities I have come to respect deeply. Georgiana studied his reflection, searching for signs of deception or manipulation. She found only steady certainty. Why? She asked finally. You could claim the properties outright, sell them, take the money and return to India or wherever you pleased. Why offer me this? Because I have spent 10 years watching the damage caused by men who take without building, who extract without nurturing. My father believed the Duke would honor his obligations. He was wrong, and that betrayal cost him dearly. I will not repeat that pattern. If I am to finally put down roots, I want them to grow in good soil, tended by someone who understands their value. He turned to face her directly. And because, Georgiana, I believe you deserve better than to have your achievements destroyed by small-minded men protecting their own inadequacies. The use of her given name should have felt like a presumption, but instead it felt like recognition, one person seeing another clearly, without the obscuring layers of title and formality. This is mad, she whispered. Perhaps. But what in your life has been conventional? You seized control of an estate when society said you should retreat. You turned failure into prosperity when everyone predicted disaster. You have defied expectations at every turn. Is it so strange that you might marry in a manner as unconventional as everything else you have accomplished? That evening, Lady Imogen arrived to find Georgiana and Edmund deep in discussion with the solicitor, drafting marriage articles that preserved the Duchess's authority while creating a legal framework for Edmund's position at Thornfield Hall. So, you are going through with this madness, Lady Imogen observed, though her tone carried approval rather than censure. I am protecting what I have built, Georgiana replied, and accepting that I cannot do so alone, no matter how much I wish otherwise. Nothing worth having is achieved alone, my dear. Lady Imogen settled into a chair, watching as the contract took shape. I approve of Mr. Blackthorne, incidentally. He is intelligent enough to appreciate your abilities and secure enough not to feel threatened by them. That is rarer than you might think. The wedding took place 4 days later in Thornfield Hall's private chapel, witnessed only by Lady Imogen and the solicitor. Georgiana wore a dress of deep emerald rather than white, a widow's prerogative and a statement that this marriage was not a romantic beginning but a practical alliance. Edmund, in formal black superfine, spoke his vows with quiet conviction. When it came time for Georgiana to pledge herself, she hesitated for just a moment, feeling the weight of surrendering freedom she had fought so hard to win. But Edmund's hand, clasping hers, was steady rather than possessive, and his eyes, meeting hers as they repeated the ancient words, held respect rather than conquest. I promise, he added quietly, words meant for her alone, to be worthy of this trust. Deal. The breakfast following the ceremony was subdued, more a business meeting than a celebration. They reviewed the final terms of their arrangement, confirmed the legal protections now in place, and discussed how to announce the marriage to minimize scandal. It was Lady Imogen who insisted on raising a glass of champagne, her sharp eyes suspiciously bright. To the Duke and Duchess of Thornfield, she declared, may you build something extraordinary together, and may you both have the wisdom to appreciate what you have found. That night, Georgiana retired alone to her chambers, a provision they had explicitly negotiated. The marriage was real in law, but would remain unconsummated unless both parties wished otherwise. Separate bedchambers, separate lives, intersecting only in the management of the estate. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt strangely hollow, as if she had gained security, but lost some possibility she could not quite name. In the morning, she woke to find a note slipped under her door, in Edmund's distinctive hand. Your Grace, or should I now say, my dear wife, the estate manager reports frost damage to the winter wheat in the eastern fields. I have taken the liberty of arranging for the tenants to meet this afternoon to discuss mitigation strategies. Your presence would be valued, as always. Georgiana smiled despite herself. Not your attendance is required, but your presence would be valued. The distinction mattered. Perhaps, she thought as she dressed for the day, this mad arrangement might actually work. Winter settled over Thornfield Hall with unusual severity that year, bringing storms that isolated the estate for days at a time and tested every system Georgiana had put in place. It also, unexpectedly, solidified the partnership between the new Duke and Duchess. Edmund proved his worth a dozen times over during those harsh months. When the river froze and threatened the mill's operations, he organized teams to break the ice and keep the water flowing. When illness struck several tenant families, he worked alongside Georgiana to ensure they had food, fuel, and medical attention. When a particularly fierce storm damaged the roof of the eastern barn, he climbed the ladder himself to assess the repairs needed, earning the respect of men who had initially viewed him with suspicion. Georgiana found herself relying on him in ways she had never relied on another person, not because she lacked capability, but because having a true partner meant the burden could be shared rather than carried alone. Their evening conversations in the library became a cherished routine. They would review the day's challenges, debate solutions to ongoing problems, and gradually share more personal stories. Edmund spoke of his years abroad, of the loneliness of being perpetually a stranger, of the hunger for belonging that had driven him back to England despite his success in exile. Georgiana, in turn, found herself revealing truths she had never spoken aloud, how her father's financial desperation had forced her marriage to the Duke, how the Duke's cruelty had been subtle but pervasive, how she had learned to bury softness beneath competence because vulnerability was a luxury she could not afford. You deserve more than survival, Edmund said one night, the firelight casting shadows across his serious face. You deserve joy. Joy is impractical. Joy is essential. Without it, success is merely existence. The words haunted her, suggesting possibilities she was afraid to acknowledge. It was in March, with the first hints of spring thawing the frozen ground, that Lord Stirling Blackwood arrived at Thornfield Hall unannounced. Georgiana received him in the drawing-room with Edmund at her side, a statement of unity that was not lost on their visitor. Lord Blackwood was a man of 50, corpulent and self-important, with pale eyes that assessed everything for potential advantage. He had clearly not expected to find Georgiana married. Your Grace, he addressed Edmund, with barely concealed annoyance, having been forced to acknowledge the new Duke's superior rank. And Duchess, I had not heard of your marriage. How sudden. We saw no reason for delay, Georgiana replied coolly. Was there a purpose to your visit, Lord Blackwood? Simply neighbourly concern. There were rumours last winter of irregularities at Thornfield Hall. I felt obligated to investigate to ensure that all was well with our dear Duchess. The false solicitude dripped like honey. But I see you have resolved matters in your own way. My way has always been effective, Georgiana said sharply. Now, if you have satisfied your curiosity, actually, Your Grace, there is another matter. Lord Blackwood's expression shifted to something harder. I have received correspondence from a Mr. Harold Ashworth, who claims to be the Duke Henry's legitimate heir. He contests the current disposition of the estate and demands an accounting of all revenues since the late Duke's death. The name struck like a physical blow. Harold Ashworth was a third cousin twice removed, a dissolute gambler who had approached Georgiana once before claiming kinship. She had investigated his claim thoroughly and found it spurious, based on a relationship so distant it carried no legal weight. "Harold Ashworth has no legitimate claim," she said firmly. "My solicitor has confirmed this repeatedly." "Perhaps. But Mr. Ashworth is now suggesting that the Duke's death was not accidental, that certain parties might have had motive to ensure his demise." Lord Blackwood's gaze moved between Georgiana and Edmund with insulting speculation. "Combined with your hasty marriage to a virtual stranger, these suggestions have gained unfortunate traction in certain circles." The implication was clear and vile. Georgiana felt rage flash through her so hot and sudden that for a moment she could not speak. Edmund could. He rose slowly, his movements controlled but radiating danger. "Lord Blackwood, you will leave this house immediately. I am merely reporting concerns that have been raised. You are spreading malicious gossip designed to damage the Duchess's reputation because she had the audacity to refuse your own transparently self-serving offers." Edmund's voice remained quiet, but carried absolute authority. "The Duke Henry's death was investigated thoroughly by local magistrates and found to be accidental, a conclusion reached before I ever set foot in England. Any suggestion otherwise is slander, and if repeated, will be met with legal action. You cannot threaten me." "That was not a threat. It was a promise." Edmund moved closer, and Lord Blackwood actually took a step back. "The Duchess has built something remarkable at Thornfield Hall, despite men like you attempting to undermine her at every turn. That ends now. You will return to your own estate, you will ensure that Harold Ashworth's baseless claims are silenced, and you will cease all interference in Thornfield's affairs. Am I understood?" Lord Blackwood's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. He spluttered objections, threats of his own, reminders of his position in the county. But Edmund simply waited, implacable, until the older man finally retreated toward the door. "You will regret this," Lord Blackwood hissed at Georgiana. "Both of you will regret this presumption." When he had gone, Georgiana found herself trembling, not with fear, but with a complex mix of anger and relief, and something deeper, more profound. "I could have handled him," she said quietly. "I know, but you should not have to." Edmund turned to face her, his expression softening. "You have spent years fighting these battles alone, Georgiana. Allowing me to stand beside you is not weakness. It is trust. I do trust you." The words emerged before she could stop them, and once spoken she realized they were true. Somewhere in the months since Edmund's arrival, trust had grown like unexpected spring flowers in winter soil. Edmund closed the distance between them, his hand reaching to cup her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "I know the terms of our arrangement. I know you married me for practical reasons, not romantic ones. But I need you to understand something. This has become more than business for me. You have become more than a partner in managing land." Edmund, she should pull away, should maintain the safe distance they had negotiated, but she found herself leaning into his touch instead. "I will not press you. I will never demand more than you freely offer, but I wanted you to know that what I feel for you—" He paused, searching for words. "Admiration, respect, and something deeper. Something I have never felt for another person." Georgiana felt something crack open inside her, some protective wall she had built after years of disappointment and pain. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I was destroyed once by marriage. I cannot bear to be diminished again." "You could never be diminished. You are the strongest person I have known." Edmund's thumb brushed her cheek gently. "But strength does not require solitude, and allowing someone to care for you is not surrender." When he kissed her, it was questioning rather than demanding, offering rather than taking. And when she kissed him back, it was with the tentative hope of someone learning that trust might not be such a dangerous gamble after all. That evening, for the first time since their marriage, Edmund did not retire to his own chambers. And Georgiana, for the first time in years, allowed herself to be vulnerable with another person, to trust that partnership could be real, and that love might be something other than a weapon used to control. In the days that followed, Lord Blackwood's threats came to nothing. Harold Ashworth's claims were investigated by objective authorities and dismissed as fraudulent. And Thornfield Hall flourished under the management of a Duke and Duchess who had learned that true strength lay not in ruling alone, but in building together. Spring arrived with determined brilliance, as if the world itself was celebrating renewal. The meadows around Thornfield Hall burst into colour, the tenants reported excellent prospects for the planting season, and the estate seemed to hum with productive energy. Georgiana stood in the western timberlands, watching as Edmund directed a selective cutting operation that would thin the forest while preserving its long-term health. He had discarded his coat in the warm sunlight, his shirt sleeves rolled up, as he consulted with the head forester about which trees to mark. He looked, she thought, with a mix of affection and amusement, entirely unlike the gentleman who had arrived storm-soaked at her door 7 months ago. He looked like a man who belonged to this land, to this life, to her. "Your Grace appears pleased." Lady Imogen's voice came from behind her, and Georgiana turned to find her cousin approaching on horseback, having ridden out from the main house. "The timber operation is proceeding efficiently," Georgiana replied, deliberately misunderstanding. "I was not referring to the timber, my dear, and you know it." Lady Imogen dismounted with practiced grace despite her years. "You have the look of a woman who has discovered that happiness is not, in fact, a myth created to torture the practical-minded." Georgiana felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I am merely satisfied with how the partnership has developed." "Partnership? Is that what we are calling it now?" Lady Imogen's eyes sparkled with knowing humour. "The entire household is aware that the Duke has not slept in his own chambers in weeks. Mrs. Hartley, the housekeeper, reports that you smile at breakfast. These are signs of something rather more significant than a business arrangement. You are insufferable." "I am right." Lady Imogen's expression softened. "And I am happy for you, Georgiana. You deserve this. You have always deserved it." Edmund chose that moment to notice them, and he waved before making his way across the cleared ground. His shirt clung to him from exertion, and Georgiana found her pulse quickening in a way that would have mortified her 7 months ago, but now simply felt natural. "Lady Imogen," Edmund greeted her with a warm smile, "we were not expecting you. I came to inform you both that Lord Blackwood has decamped to London for the season. It seems he found the Derbyshire air suddenly disagreeable." Lady Imogen's tone was dry. "I suspect he will not trouble you further. A man cannot maintain dignity after such a thorough defeat." "Good riddance," Georgiana said with satisfaction. The three of them walked together back toward the main house, discussing plans for the summer improvements: a new irrigation system for the tenant farms, expansion of the village school, perhaps even a small lending library that Georgiana had been considering. That evening, after Lady Imogen had departed and dinner had been served, Georgiana and Edmund retreated to the library, as had become their custom. But instead of immediately diving into estate business, Edmund pulled 2 glasses and a bottle of wine from the sideboard. "We should celebrate," he announced. "Celebrate what? Survival? Success? The fact that we have somehow transformed what should have been a disaster into something rather wonderful." He poured the wine and handed her a glass. "7 months ago, I arrived here as an unwelcome stranger. Now I cannot imagine being anywhere else." Georgiana accepted the glass, her fingers brushing his. "7 months ago, I would have said I needed no one. That independence was the only security worth having. And now? Now I know that independence and partnership are not opposites, that I can remain myself, while also being part of something larger." She met his eyes directly. "I love you, Edmund. I did not plan to. I certainly did not want to, but somehow you made it impossible not to." The joy that blazed across his face was incandescent. He set his wine down carefully and drew her into his arms with a gentleness that still, always, took her breath away. "I have loved you, since the morning you explained crop rotation theory with such passion that you knocked over an inkwell and did not notice for 10 minutes, he confessed. I loved your fierce intelligence, your determination, your unwillingness to compromise on what mattered. I loved that you saw weakness as something to overcome rather than something to excuse. I love every part of you. She kissed him then, letting the kiss say what words could not fully express. Gratitude for his patience, joy in his presence, hope for their future together. They made love that night, not in the desperate rush of new passion, but with the deep confidence of two people who knew each other's strengths and vulnerabilities, and treasured both. And afterward, lying in Edmund's arms, in the enormous bed that had once been her lonely fortress, Georgiana felt something she had not experienced since childhood: absolute safety. What will people say, she murmured, when they learn the Iron Duchess has gone soft? They will say she was wise enough to recognize that true strength includes the courage to trust, and they will be right. Edmund pressed a kiss to her forehead. Though I suspect you will always be formidable in business matters, one does not abandon competence simply because one has discovered affection. I should hope not. Someone must ensure you do not make rash decisions about the timber contracts. His laugh rumbled through his chest. There she is, my fierce, practical, absolutely extraordinary wife. 6 months later, on a crisp October morning, Georgiana stood in the same library where Edmund had first presented his documents and reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. The estate flourished. The tenants spoke of the Duke and Duchess with genuine respect and even affection. The western timberlands, the tenant farms, and the hunting lodge at Blackmoor all contributed to Thornfield's prosperity under their joint management. But more than that, Georgiana had discovered that she could be strong and vulnerable, independent and partnered. The Iron Duchess and simply Georgiana, beloved wife to a man who saw all her facets and treasured each one. She heard Edmund's footsteps in the corridor and smiled, setting aside the letter she'd been reading. A note from Lady Imogen reporting that Lord Blackwood had made a disastrous investment in a canal scheme and was now desperate to sell his own estate. Karma, Lady Imogen had written, is a patient but thorough accountant. Edmund entered, his arms full of the account books that required their weekly review. But he paused at the sight of her expression. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I am grateful for storms," Georgiana replied, "for debts that brought strangers to my door, for the courage to trust when every instinct screamed for self-protection." Edmund set down the books and crossed to her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. "And I am grateful for fierce widows who challenged me to be worthy of their trust, who showed me that true partnership is worth more than independence, and who taught me that the greatest adventure is not sailing to distant ports, but building a life with someone extraordinary." Outside the library windows, autumn painted the landscape in gold and crimson. The land stretched out prosperous and peaceful, tended by people who cared for it and for each other. And inside Thornfield Hall, in the library where their complicated partnership had begun, the Duke and Duchess held each other close and looked toward a future they would build together. One season, one challenge, one triumph at a time. The Iron Duchess had ruled alone and ruled well, but the woman she had become, strong and tender, independent and partnered, guarded and open, ruled even better with love at her side. Thank you so much for listening to this journey of Duchess Georgiana and Edmund Blackthorne. From strangers with conflicting claims to partners in both land and love. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic historical romances, and leave a comment telling me which moment resonated with you most. Was it Georgiana's fierce independence, Edmund's patient respect, or perhaps the moment they finally admitted what had grown between them? I love hearing your thoughts, and your comments help me create the stories you want to hear. Until next time, remember that the greatest strength sometimes lies in having the courage to trust.